Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, our post-budget discussion. Take two, we have to add, because we tried this on the 19th of February, but then we had our historic postponement to our budget announcement. At the time, the evening when we analyzed it, we felt that although surprising, it wasn't actually shocking, and that if anything, it was probably a proof that our new democratic process and the Government of National Unity, the GNU, was actually working, and that this new dispensation in South Africa was showing its effectiveness. And that was probably a good thing. And the market moves since then have actually proved that out. On the domestic side, equity market, the JSE was down about 1% during the period since then. The rand was actually about 1% stronger. The bond market about 1% stronger. The action has all been in the global markets, and that's thanks to Mr. Trump shaking the global tree and shooting everything and everybody in sight with his tariffs. And so the global markets have taken a bit of a step back, but we are going to talk about that a little bit later. Back to today's budget. As always, the minister emphasized the four priorities that they follow, and those being that they are looking to establish macroeconomic stability, to attain structural reforms, to build on state capability, and to implement growth-enhancing infrastructure investments. So much so that the title of today's budget by the Treasury was Investing for Faster Growth. Now, amongst several hundred pages of numbers, we have to go look and find that investing for faster growth. And to do that, I'm joined as always by Martin Ackerman, our chief economist. A day like today, very busy for you, Martin. Every radio station, every television station is looking for our chief economist to assist them in unpacking all of this. So this is always a busy time for you. Welcome and thanks for joining me. This is becoming an institution where after every big major thing in the world, you and I talk to the Citadel family first. So good evening.
Yes, George, thanks. Always a privilege to join.
Now, a budget is always based on a series of assumptions. You'll hear the language in the budget is always over the medium-term framework. Now, just so we get the language straight, that means the next 3 years. So whenever you want to look 3 years out, you're going to have some assumptions. And so National Treasury bases the budget and their calculations on a set of economic assumptions. Why don't you start off by telling us what those are and your comments on those?
Yes, let's do that, George. Just a reminder for all the guests that they can pop Q&A in the bottom of their screen or side of your screen. And then between George and myself throughout the presentation or the chat tonight or afterwards, we can address those. So you're welcome to put some questions in that box. Yes, George, to answer that question. So the budget, there's some very important assumptions that goes into the budget. Probably the most important one is your economic growth. I always argue that that is your silver bullet. If we can get economic growth to more higher sustainable levels, then none of these kind of things that we're going to unpack tonight is actually necessary. Things like your debt to GDP, things like whether you should increase VAT or not, because the economy that's growing fast, with that comes all the benefits of given your current tax system, higher collection and revenue, less reliance on debt and. Unfortunately, and maybe it's human nature, but if you look at the budget for the last 5 years, every time they pencil in numbers for the next 3 years, it is much higher than the last 3 years, or given the environment we're in. And that's why I say maybe it's a human nature that we hope for better, and that is important. But I guess what we need to do is say, well, is this realistic and achievable? Because our president is walking around talking about 3% growth in the next couple of years. And not even the Treasury today are seeing anything close to that. In fact, their high road scenario that's in the big meat document, if everything goes according to plan, even Mr. Trump is not shaking the tree too much. In that high road scenario, not only in the 3 years, but in the next decade, they're not even seeing 3% growth. So it just shows you how stretched a 3% number is potentially in terms of getting this economy with all the structural issues there. So the number on the table today is, call it 1.8% for the next 3 years on average. But in 2025, the year we're in right now, they're seeing a number of 1.9. That is quite a challenge. Just last week, we got the number for 2024, which was sub 1%, in an environment where agriculture was the fastest growing sector, adding more than 40% to economic growth. Now, keep in mind, that's only a 2% industry in this economy. So it shows you just how weak all the other industries, the big ones, mining, manufacturing, construction, is performing at this point in time. It also explains a little bit the sensitivity right now in terms of the political storm between us and the US, because that is or includes a lot of farming emotions, if you like. But my point there is to say that we can't rely on a very volatile sector like that to put us out of the slump. And that is probably where the investing for the future comes from. What do we need to do to get to 1.9, which I think, might be possible in 2025, but that really depends on the speed of implementation. So I think that's enough on economic growth. So let's say 1.8 for the next 3 years. That is important. We'll unpack it a little bit later. But then obviously when you start looking at GDP to debt to GDP or your deficit to GDP, you need to keep in mind that's assuming you get 1.8. Anything more than that, well, that number looks much better. Looking at the low road scenario where Trump really shake the tree and, we see a major headwind for SA, all those numbers are actually looking much weaker. The other important one, and probably the last one from an economic input point, is your inflation. So what do they see inflation to be over the next 3 years? Because that impact all your real adjustments. Just a reminder, right now, we've got an inflation target or range between 3 and 6%. Central Bank, I think, very often think about 4.5 as the mid-range or the mid-target. Current inflation is well below that, which is why there's a lot of debate in the market why we can't see bigger interest rate cuts. Can get back to that later on. But even there, the numbers are, worst case scenario, they're going to about 4.6. So call it in the middle of that range. And once again, I think that is quite an optimistic point, given where we are right now. In a full-blown trade war globally, with the rand potentially under pressure, the Reserve Bank, in their kind of scenarios, are seeing inflation, touching 5%, maybe even higher. So I think, once again, to anchor at the mid-range is optimistic. So the message on this is, when we talk tonight, keep in mind that it is quite a rosy kind of economic environment, economic growth and inflation, which actually do present a lot of downside risk. And that's what we need to understand, unpack, and then act on that.
Martin, that's a very good point that you make there. And that's exactly where I wanted to start the discussion. We have to understand what set of assumptions this budget is based on. By the end, when we come to identify the risks, it's probably going to tie straight back to this. In fact, I'll add to, you've added on the GDP growth assumption and on inflation, household consumption expenditure. They're calling it 1.9, declining down to 1.5, 1.7 in the next 3 years, and government fixed capital formation down from 5 to 3.7. So both of those factors also somewhat lower, just adding to that picture. To get to 2% will remain a bit of a stretch for us on the growth numbers, and especially once we place it in the global context. But we'll get back to that. So how did the markets initially react to the budget? It's interesting that most of the move that we saw today actually happened just before the budget. And that's quite interesting. The bond market didn't do much because the funding requirements are not under severe strain right now. So the bond market, an important angle for in the budget always. The equity market, not so much. The equity market's waiting for this, investing for growth. And so they're going to wait and see whether it happens. But the place where we did see it was in the currency. The rand essentially weakened by the best part of 20 cents during the course of the day. As we speak, it's pulled back about 8 cents. But that was at the height of it. And that uncertainty that started pricing into the rand is now the next thing that we can talk about, Martin, is that, where do we stand now with the budget? Because this budget has been presented in Parliament. The last time a war erupted before they even walked into Parliament, this time it was well presented and then we'll debate it, because now it needs to go to a variety of committees and some debate needs to take place. But in your sense, where do we stand with the budget right now? Because what we heard today is not final, not implemented, not done yet.
Yes, yeah. So it's very important. I think the uncertainty that started after the cancellation in February is still there. So this is a amended budget. If you look at the actual budget compared to the one in Feb, then there are definitely some changes, some of them quite major. But obviously the issue in February was all around the 2% increase in VAT, which today was suggested to be only a 0.5% for the first year. Then in the second year, depending on where we are, another 0.5%. So phasing in at a maximum of 1%. But then with other tweaks, which we will get to. But like you've said, this is now the budget proposal, which they still haven't had agreement on between all the parties in the Government of National Unity. So the decision was taken to say, well, given the uncertainty and given the commitment, and if you watch the speech this afternoon, some of the opposition started saying they need to apologize that they actually cancelled the budget and they need to apologize because they're late. So the first 5 minutes was all about apologies. But the point is that the actual proposal still needs to be, or components of that needs to be agreed by Parliament before it can actually be implemented. So that will send us into another couple of weeks of uncertainty. That agreement, if I'm right, should be agreed by at the beginning of April. And then after they can start with the implementation. So we need to keep in mind that this is an amended budget, given the issues they had in Feb. But definitely everything's not been approved and they didn't get to conclusions over the last couple of weeks through negotiations. So we can still see that some of these things get challenged and might even be changed again going forward.
Important point. So that's exactly why the rand fibrillated a little bit prior to the budget and might seem a little bit unanchored for the next little while. But let's quickly then look at the mathematics of how the voting works, because in the GNU has 287 of the 400 total votes in Parliament. So if everybody in the GNU agreed, it would go through smoothly. But today, the DA immediately indicated that they currently don't support it in this format, to your point that it might still change. The ANC only has 159 seats of the 400, so they need somebody to take it through with them. The MK party has 58, so if they had to tie up with them for that vote, they will get it over the line, but it seems unlikely that the MK party will vote for a hike in VAT. And then the EFF has got 39, so they don't even have enough. They'll need somebody else to go with it. But the point is, if the ANC has to look for somebody other than the DA to support them to get this over the line, then in essence, the GNU is breaking up. And that is the fear factor that the rand showed today. And that is a bit of a political uncertainty that we are going to carry with us for the next 2.5 weeks. So you can expect a lot of political statement and noise around this and about the GNU breaking down, whatever. We have to go back on the commitment of everybody that signed up for the GNU, that they actually want to make this thing work and make it stick through. And let's hope that they stick to that. So Martin, let's get to the main numbers in the budget. Is there anything specifically on the revenue side? I mean, the revenue, personal income tax is by far the largest. 37% of the revenue is from personal income tax. 23% is from VAT, and 15% is from corporate tax. So I think it was smart. There were comments that we've achieved the Laffer curve, where even if you increased personal tax, that you're probably not going to get more revenue. And so they went lower down the scale, and that's probably where it ended up with the VAT. But any other comments you have around the revenue line in the budget?
So I think the revenue, if you look at the percentage growth in revenue, that's for the next 3 years, slightly more than 30%. I'm sorry, 27%. The expenditure is growing around about 31%. So there immediately you see there's a gap. So you assume that you're going to spend much more than what you're getting in. What you're getting in, again, back to economic growth, is a function of low growth. As even taking into consideration that you're increasing taxes, you're not meeting your expenses. So it clearly shows the revenue in the current format that is under severe pressure. The makeup, and we can talk about that in detail, like you said, is obviously where you go, you can tax the individuals more, but there we max relative to our other peer group countries, middle income countries. So they know that they can't really squeeze more out of that lemon. The corporate one is quite interesting. The corporate rate is higher than other countries, and we're in an environment investing for the future. But one of the things that the government wants to achieve is say, how do we make ourselves more attractive for foreign direct investments? It's one thing if you fix all the ports and the trains are running and the lights are on, but you're taxing them much more compared to your neighbors. So if we compare our corporate tax and you also compare our corporate tax as a percentage of GDP, we're way above our peer group. So in fact, they would like to make a case in time to say, well, if we're in an environment where the economy is starting to grow, to even cut that even further. And I guess that was almost by elimination that they got to the VAT rate. And that's also a long debate to have the 0.5%, like you said, and they tweaked it on the rest. But remember, the 2% increase, they were looking for about 60 billion. Now they're sitting with, not even 30 billion by going this VAT increase, by surprising us by saying, and by the way, we're not going to do any bracket creep adjustments, which was part of the first budget. They tried to alleviate and talking to the poor, so there's no increase on the fuel levy, and then quite a high increase on all the sin taxes. So the mix of taxes, they tried to say, well, if we can't get 2% VAT, only 0.5%, we need to do something else. And I think there the consumer is not in a better position, especially those that pay as you earn, because of the non-adjustment of the tax brackets. So that will actually imply that we actually pay more tax than what we would have paid with just a flat 2% increase. So that is what you pick up between the lines. But that's how they could only try and get revenue to match that growth that they see over the next 3 years. And once again, like I said, that's not even getting close to the growth in expenses, which is almost hard-coded into the budget.
Martin, those are brilliant comments that you added there. That's the things that lie there in the fine print, is that there was no inflationary increases to the tax brackets, and that alone gives a huge boost to tax revenue. And your point about the effective tax rate that we pay probably get to the same thing. But there's a timing difference. They like it that the VAT comes quicker than does the personal income tax. But great comments. Now, we've essentially got 3 levers in the budget. It's the revenue side, then the expenditure side, and then how much you borrow. Those are the 3 things. It seems like our borrowing is capped out and we don't have much upside to borrow. And that's why everything for the budget needs to be sorted out between the revenue and expenditure. Now, the governing party hasn't been great in cutting expenditure, and austerity is not a word that they like. But what did you pick up on the expenditure side of the budget today?
Yeah, you're 100% right. That some of the pushback was to say, but rather go back, and the World Bank said it as well last week when the government couldn't get to a conclusion. The World Bank said, guys, there's a lot of places where you can actually cut on the expense side that's not necessary, that's excessive, without increasing your revenue through the tax. So on the expense side, obviously one of the big ones is the 5.5% increase on the wage bill. So the wage bill in itself, the salary bill for government employees is some of the highest in the world relative to the OECD. And then we increase that by 5.5, which is a inflation plus increase at this point in time. And basically what you do is you bake that into the cake forever, unless at some point government will turn around and say, no, we're going to cut salaries, which we know is not going to happen. So you lift your expense base permanently by 5.5%, which is more than inflation. That was the one. The other one, which is something that we need to do, is the social grants. We're sitting in a country where while we wait for the economy to get going, there are more and more people that's under pressure. And if we're not going to look after them, especially if they got used to some of those grants, we're creating a unstable platform and potential for more social unrest. So that is definitely something where government must always make sure that they can pay that. And by the way, just part of the VAT increase was to say that let's try and give the social grants a more than inflation increase. So that we look after them. So that's your big components. And then obviously the debt issue. So, with this kind of growth, like you've mentioned, we are right at the ceiling. So we're approaching 80% of GDP. Now, some people might argue, but the US is already north of 125. Japan is closer to 200. But we're not the US. We pay with that Rand notes and not with USD notes. It's very different. So for us, 80 is already relative to our peer group quite a stretch. So our debt service cost, depending on how you cut and paste the budget, but that is probably the biggest component in the budget. About 22 cents of every Rand collected is going back paying interest. And again, just to put that into perspective, if you look, where's that graph? If you compare that to our peer group, the median sits below 8%. We are 22%. And the one that's second worst compared to us is sitting around about 12%. So, there's a big gap between 12% and 22% or 22 cents that we are paying on interest. And that is exactly why, and probably the government is doing the right thing to say, well, we can't afford to borrow more. The economy is not growing yet. So we need to tax, which makes it quite a challenge. But just, George, on that fact that the debt is sitting at, call it close to 80, back to my original point that, there's downside risk to the growth. So if things go wrong, very easily without even borrowing more, just our current debt levels, we can be north of 80. What is that going to mean for our rating agencies and our rating as a country? And then obviously the ability to borrow and what's happening in our bond markets.
Yeah, Martin, I think what I wanted to add to your expenditure comments was that the sense I got from the budget today was that, all our expenditures are essentially hard-coded. You highlighted the social grants and many of the social expenditures that we must have, agreed, but that means that they're hard-coded, that they can't change and they can't be reduced, whereas our income and our revenue side is volatile and variable, and it's depending on factors that we have very little control over. And therein lies the fragility and the risk that you now highlight and ask me about, because the third lever, the moment that you don't balance, you have to go and borrow. And because we are so close to that magical 80%. So what's the magical 80%? Well, in theory, if an emerging market goes with a debt to GDP ratio of higher than 80%, then the IMF moves in and have to assist to clear out. And there's many rules that get triggered, and our politicians are very scared of that because it does feel like a Western takeover then. But you essentially can't raise any new money in that situation, and that would place us into a credit crisis. Now, before we sound scaremongering here, our numbers essentially up until recently looked quite good. And it did look like we're going to reach a ceiling or a top on our debt to GDP ratio, and that it would start declining after that. But I have to admit, they've had that in the budget for the last 10 years, and it has never declined. And I want to add another thing which is important. We would have been north of 80% if it wasn't for JIFECRA. Remember, we spent the whole of last year explaining JIFECRA, Global Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account, where 150 billion was taken out of that. 100 billion was applied to debt last year, 25 this year, 25 next year. So inside these numbers, which we don't even talk about in the budget because they just get deducted straight from debt, is another 50 billion that has already been baked into the cake. That kind of buffers us from not getting to that 80. But Martin, my point is just that the fragility of our numbers has increased here because there's very little wiggle room left in these numbers. There's no fat left. They couldn't even put any money across to a contingency reserve account this year. And so you ask about ratings. Well, the rating agencies have slowly but surely said, well, we're not deteriorating anymore. So our outlook has become neutral. In fact, one of the rating agencies actually suggested that our outlook could turn positive. That was on the back of the GNU and the growth prospects and the fact that electricity came back and our energy was better. And so there was a sense that that there's some improvement possible down the line. And so the credit rating outlook is probably not problematic. I think we'll touch on some of the other problems a little bit later on when we get to some of the other global stuff, or maybe if anything, that right now is the right time to talk about it, Martin, is that, you know, you touched earlier on our relations with the US. And in the meantime, a couple of things have changed for us already in terms of our direct interactions with the US. And this now has a direct impact on our debt levels and on our funding levels. And today in the budget, I didn't see anything for it. So do you want to talk about the numbers that got affected by the US directly?
Yes, George, maybe before I do that, just back to your, we spoke about the numbers, and the numbers are basically looking at where we are right now and the things that we can measure or at least put an estimate on for the next 3 years. What is important also from this budget is that, we're trying to gap the time between now and when more sustainable growth is coming, investing for the future, the theme of the budget. So there's been quite a focus in the budget on, so what are they going to do? Now, again, for the last 3 to 5 years, every time there is talks about reforms and structural changes, and it's slow, as we know, for many years we spoke about Eskom and we spoke about the bailouts, and slowly but surely it looks like the lights are staying on for now. But that was only one of those issues that needs to be addressed. So I think the concern is, given the track record of government in terms of implementing this, we realize that even if they are changing the law, even if they present some plans today, it takes time before you actually see the results. Having said all of that, there was a couple of things in the budget to say today, what are they going to do? Well, two things. They gave some feedback in terms of the first phase of the infrastructure development plan, where they are making good progress. And that's something that we don't read about in the newspapers every day. Just to highlight a few, the fact that data is 50% cheaper. Now, for us, that might not mean a lot, but, for someone studying and that needs access to the internet, that makes a huge change. Water rights, approval of that, which is very important for the farming community, from 300 days to 90 days. And then, using technology for things like our visa applications, much faster, adding about 30 countries to that. So where we stand right now, we're seeing a record number of tourists arriving in the country. For every 10 tourists that arrive here, we create one permanent job. So that's the kind of things where some of the opposition or the partners in the government of national unity is asking, can't we focus more on those initiatives, measure them, make sure that they are implemented, and then get to the better growth quicker than just muddling along, instead of just trying to create revenue by further taxes. So my point there is just to say that despite the challenges from a fiscal point of view, despite the fact that we think at this point in time the growth estimates are fairly rich, there are definitely things happening on the ground in terms of moving in the right direction, which bring us back to the point that you've made, that it is so important that the government of national unity get through this to the other side and stay together, because unfortunately a lot of that might fall to the sides if we don't have that. So my feeling is that the budget today versus, let's say, a budget 5 years ago what's much more open to private participation, inviting the private sector to participate, solving the problems. And I do think there is going to be a take up of that. That brings us to the private sector not facing only local issues, but the international issues, like you've mentioned. So we are facing this challenge where, well, two things. The US pulled away US aid. The country received quite a fair amount in terms of US aid, especially for healthcare services. The HIV program that's been running has got huge implications in terms of keep that going. And in the budget today, there was almost nothing said about how they're going to cover that. And it might be because there is no funding, there is no revenue to actually look at that at this point in time. Then on top of that, we in this messy trade war at the moment, where there's talks about AGOA, there's talks about maybe even sanctions. The important thing here is that, yes, all of those are very important to us, especially for some of those where we get preferential trade agreements. Some of our bigger sectors are benefiting from that directly, like the auto industry and, again, also the agricultural export industry. But the whole world is in a stage of getting used to the new world that we're in, finding new trading partners. So although there might be headwinds initially, there might be opportunities longer term as well. Africa as a collective is actually a slightly bigger trading partner compared to the US, if we think about our trading partners. And they're also a net importer of food, like the US, and we are a net exporter. So there is definitely going to be opportunities to pick up other trading partners. But in an environment where, as you explained it, we are on the risky side and we're in a dangerous environment in terms of our fiscal situation, we don't have a lot of time to pick up those benefits to keep the economy growing. So yeah, that remains another risk on the horizon, which in their document, they put it as one of the downside scenarios. Which, like I've said, can cause some of the numbers that we saw today to come under pressure. So unfortunately, with Trump back in the White House and just watching what's been happening with other countries right now, ours are not over yet. We're still trying to get into Washington, our government, to go and have a discussion with them. So in the next couple of months, that is still something that we're going to monitor with a lot of volatility, but as usual, there will be opportunities like this couple of weeks already showed us in terms of how markets reacted on the Canadian-US trade war.
Martin, great conversation. You touched on so many things there, so I think we'll circle back to a couple of them, and I'll definitely come back to the US issue again, because when we look forward where investment opportunities and risks lie, we're definitely going to have to touch on that again. You know, you touched on that the budget included and was very open to private sector participation. I fully agree with that, and that was brilliant. That's the search for infrastructure investment that government really wants, but they want private participation in that process. That is brilliant to see that. I'm so pleased with that. Private investors, and I'm talking institutional investors, want to invest in infrastructure, but we need thoroughly governed structures to do that. We're not going to throw the money in the middle of the government pot because it's not governed well enough. And so I was very excited to see that. In fact, some of these growth assumptions could be low if they get that right. So I saw a question there, is this an investor-friendly budget? And that point that Martin touched on there is the one thing that we can hang our hat on. If government sticks to this, that they invite and create the platform and the opportunity for private capital to participate in the infrastructure rollout process, then those growth numbers that Martin cited right in the beginning will be too low. It'll be more than that. They spoke today about R1 trillion on top of an economy that is R8 trillion big. I mean, that is a large 4% per year investment in infrastructure. That is huge if we can see that. So, Martin, to that point of yours, that is so crucially important. The next thing
George, maybe just jump in there. we did see the power of the private sector getting involved. Now, yes, they had an incentive. We had a 2-year close window of going solar, and that added a lot to resolving the issues that we are dealing with. So private sector is willing. Private sector is sitting with a lot of cash. Look on cash on their balance sheets. But they need to make sure or need to know that when they make that investment, there is going to be a return on capital. So we know they're there, we know they're ready, and the government just need to open that door and provide the environment, like you said. And I think that then we are definitely moving in the right direction.
Absolutely, I agree. And so if you look at, is this investor friendly and is this investing for growth, then it's that infrastructure story. For the rest, I don't really find it there. The other thing you now touched on is the solar boom that we've had in South Africa. And that brings us back to Eskom and the bailing out of SOEs, and National Treasury was straightforward and said, tough love, and we're not going to bail out SOEs any longer. However, in this budget, there's still 40 billion rand that goes to Eskom this year. Then they scrapped the 20 billion for next year, and then for 2027, 2028, there's another 10 billion that's penciled in today's budget. Now, Eskom made a 55 billion rand loss last year. So this 40 billion we're throwing in now doesn't even fill this year's hole. Never mind what's coming down the line. So I think Treasury is living in la la land if they think that they can walk away from Eskom and not support it any further. We have 484 billion rand of contingent liabilities still on the government balance sheet. And if you think that those are not going to come home to roost, you are fast asleep at the wheel. So, Martin, I'm still very concerned about that aspect. You asked me earlier, but I needed to raise my blood pressure first before I could answer you on specifically on bonds. And the bond situation in South Africa is that often we compare it to our inflation rate, and our bond yields are at 10, 15. Inflation is at 4.50, 6% real. That's wonderful. But the risks embedded inside our bonds have just been growing and growing and growing. This fiscal picture is deteriorating through time. And meanwhile, we're playing joust with Mr. Trump. And so we consider South African bonds as overvalued, and we would slowly but surely be selling them into strength as we go through this process. So that's just some direct market feedback on that question you asked me. But then on SOEs, Martin, on state-owned enterprises, any other comments on any of those?
Well, you've mentioned about Eskom, and I think Transnet is next in line. Financially, they've got some issues. We know that that's now been, well, fortunately, we've learned from Eskom. So government's been quicker in terms of changing legislation to get the private sector to the table. Some of those tenders are happening as we speak. So that should speed up. But the financial situation or the current SOE, and now I'm not even talking about the SABC, the post office, they're all down and under, still employing people. So that kind of liability on the budget, unfortunately, is still going to remain. And that's where a lot of the wage bill and is going. It's the employment in these SOEs.
Yep. You mentioned that you can't remember whether he said anything about USAID. Well, you remember right, because he didn't say a word in replacing that. So there's absolutely nothing for that. NHI in this budget, there's nothing new in it. But there in the previous, in version 1, there's nothing new in it, but there's 8.5 billion over the 3-year period in preparing for it, IT systems, blah, 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 data gathering, you name it. But still, a vast number, but still, your point is right. There's nothing on the real rollout of NHI because the cost of that is just a big number that moved to Mr. Adrian Gore to calculate. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on, is the following thing of the US. We touched on USAID. AGOA, if I ask people in the know now, they laugh at me that I ask. They consider it to be tears. How can we imagine to go to the US now and to try and negotiate with them a preferential trade agreement after how our international relations have gone. So they actually view that from a very negative perspective. You add to that our grey listing adjudication, where we ticked all the boxes bar two, but the two that are left are pretty difficult. And so there's small chance that we're going to get off of that until very late this year, early next year at the first opportunity. So, Martin, unfortunately, on those issues where the US is involved in direct relations with South Africa, unfortunately, still a lot of dark clouds around.
Yeah, I agree, George. I think just on the AGOA, keep in mind that with or without Trump, September 2025, AGOA was supposed to be reviewed. So it's not a Trump review. That was just, we were in for 10 years. We were actually included as a favor because they included low-income countries to benefit from that in sub-Saharan Africa. We already a middle-income country, so we included us because we're part of the region. So yeah, I think it's a given that, it's not going to continue in its current form, probably for all of those countries. And if you look at Trump's style, he will probably go to each and every country and say, you've got this that I need, and I'll set up a trade agreement just for that. So that's the point to say that we need to prepare for the worst, but he might come to us and say, I want this, this, and this, and they will have agreement for that, but the rest we're not going to get the benefit. So we need to be wide awake to actually go and look for those other markets. So the US is going to be a headwind for us for the rest of this year.
And now you lead me into the next point. You say we're going to have to go look for those. And therein lies maybe the question. But let's now move quickly. Everything we discuss about the budget is all this domestic stuff. And from a domestic perspective, the infrastructure investment will be magnificently positive if it does eventuate, with some question marks, but still. The other aspect is, as we look forward, what will impact us more in terms of implications for markets is what is happening globally right now. And much of it is political, and the political interaction that we have with other countries and with the US. This tariff war that is happening right now, Mr. Trump shaking the world's tree, is leading to more nationalism. It is breaking up existing trade routes and logistical supply chains. New trade partners have to be found by everybody. And what I'm worried about is that we sit back and we wait for that to happen. But this is a front foot game. You have to be out there. And like Mr. Zelensky is out there on the front for his purpose, we should be on the same for trade purposes, because when we lose AGOA, there are certain sectors in South Africa that will suffer dramatically from that. The United States dollar, the dollar has been super strong, and then of late, in this last 2 weeks, it started giving back some ground because it has lost some of its safe haven status, as clearly these people involved in a trade war with the US are not going to invest their dollars in the US. And so we've seen the dollar pulling back somewhat. That has started the trade of money flowing over to Europe. And suddenly Europe has to defend itself. And now Europe is going to spend a lot of money. And they lifted their debt ceilings in Germany, as an example, inside Europe. And there's now an opinion that Europe can eventually start growing after many years of European growth being under pressure. And suddenly you've seen a rotation out of this US exceptionalism into Europe, out of US tech into Asian tech. And it's been dramatic over this last 2 weeks, and hence the pullback in global equities, US equities, tech equities, a good 8-9% lower. Now, herein lies the opportunity for us, because in our February roadshow all around the country, we said that the Trump volatility would be the opportunity to create the portfolio that you want after the volatility subsides, after Mr. Trump has gone through his first bluster. And that's this opportunity right now. What's happening in the markets right now is not an all fall down. We saw a graph this morning that compares the S&P to the beginning of 2020, and they look exactly the same into March. But holy moly, that was COVID. So I think that that extrapolation is a bit harsh. We don't see that. You would need a dramatic recession in the US for that type of drawdown to happen in the S&P. And Martin, if I'm right, I don't think you see a recession in the US right now.
Yeah, so 100%, George. I think there are talks about recession risk growing. It was quite muted now for 12, 18 months. So the concern is that if Trump continues with this kind of trade war with most countries and what's happening in the US with just the consumers there, that can be a risk. But right now, yeah, we still have the opinion that the US keeps on slowing. That was our view for the last 12 months. They're in that slowdown phase. They're coming from 3% growth, which was very strong relative to the rest of the world. They're now only approaching 2%, and they can, even in the worst case scenario, probably go even lower than that. But at this point in time, definitely not a recession. But we need to keep in mind that a lot of this market reaction that you are seeing is obviously the concern for such an environment. But also, the US market going into Trump wasn't dirt cheap. It was quite overvalued. So it was waiting for an opportunity to give some of that back. But a recession definitely not on the cards for now.
You'll make the equity team cross if you say it was overvalued. It wasn't overvalued according to them, remember. It's different factors today. So let's not argue whether it was overvalued or not. Fact is that, as you're saying, uncertainty is coming to the market. Some more risk premium has been priced into it. It is more fairly valued right now. And to that point, we were buying into that weakness from today, in fact. And so this is not the time to run away from risk markets. In fact, we've been underweight risk assets for quite some time. And we are actually engaging risk assets as we speak. We can maybe come back and talk about the Rand a little bit later, but the Rand will be a small fish in this big pond and all the bullets that are blowing about. Now, Martin, before
talking about investments, there is a question about, and you're touching on it, so maybe let's frame that question here. So there's a question from John saying that everything that Trump is doing and all the actions and what's happening in markets, how does that affect the way that Citadel looks at our investments, our clients' investments? So I think from a philosophy point of view, Citadel is still investing like we did over the last 30 years. But I think you explained in a way that, we've been waiting for some of these opportunities like now. And we're acting on that, given, as you explained right now, with what's been happening over the last week.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we were expecting some Trump volatility, but you have to look through that. We consider this as noise. And on the other side of this, we do see a world with new and different formations, but that grows again. And in fact, that could grow even better than it did before. More widespread growth and not as concentrated only in the US and only in tech. So, in fact, we look through that. We stick to that philosophy through thick and thin. Martin, that touches on Dirk's question, where, he sees that, or he says...
Dirk actually asked, he agrees with us that, private sector participation is the right way to go. That is really driving economic growth, or should drive economic growth in an economy for everybody. His question is to say that, is that possible to actually have a growth model driven by private sector, while actually the majority in the ruling party is still, the ideology is still a little bit socialistic? And I guess that's what you've seen from the budget. So the budget's got these two components. It's got the social spend, social pact, whether it's the social grants, the wage. I think 60% of total budget is on that social spend.
61.
And then 61. And then we want to get the private sector to participate. So I think there, Dirk, to answer you, our biggest trading partner, China, is probably one of the best examples in terms of how such a model can work. I'm not saying that is the best and the right model, but that's probably where our government is learning from, to say, well, while you've got a huge gap in equality, but a lot of poor people, government in a way needs to look after them. I think what we're still missing to an extent is that the Chinese government, as an example, is much more efficient in providing the private sector with a playing field to actually drive that economy from an economic growth point of view. Our government is learning as we speak, and that's why I said if you compare this budget to 5 years ago, we're moving in that direction, where the government will keep on probably reforming in the right direction for private sector. So it can work in such a model. It is just that your government really needs to appreciate the role that private sector needs to play. And as a result of that, really open the doors where it needs to be opened.
And then George asks the question, is this an investor-friendly budget for SA Inc.? And George, I was firing away my question already, and I missed the ink at the end. So I think you've actually got 3 questions in one there. Is this an investor-friendly budget? Well, it's not an unfriendly budget, and it's not expanding debt dramatically, and it's not doing anything that dramatically increases the risk of the country overall. So I would say, yes, it is an investor-friendly budget. Is it an investor-friendly budget for South Africa? Well, for once, they didn't antagonize Mr. Trump. So I think that's a good thing. We focused on domestic stuff. So it is a good overall budget for SA if they, and there comes my third part, you ask for SA Inc. The only thing that will be great for SA Inc. is if the infrastructure investment does take place. In fact, yes, that would be spectacular for SA Inc. But 74% of all the funding for this promised 3-year, 1 trillion infrastructure investment that was cited in the budget today has to come from state-owned enterprises and municipalities. And it's there where I lose my enthusiasm. So I don't think we'll get remotely close to that number. But quite frankly, anything we do in that regard will be positive for SA Inc. SA Inc. has had a great run since the GNU, and maybe, as Martin said, picked up in valuation quite a bit. But if we get to growth numbers north of 2%, then SA Inc. will be a good place to be. Our banks is now the largest sector in the on our exchange, and they remain a great investment. So yes, I would say overall this is a decent budget for SA Inc. Martin, I don't see any other questions. In fact, there was one other question. Bernie contacted me even before this webinar to highlight that there's so many wasteful expenditures in the government, and he rattled off a whole list of them, that we have a bigger cabinet and more embassies. And yes, Bernie, you are right. Our government is quite wasteful, and we could probably do with a doge of our own. But that's not our governing party or the ANC's policy at all to do that. So unfortunately, we can tap dance as much as we like. That's not going to happen. And then a final picture is that, that remains a relatively small number here. I mean, we're talking about, 8 trillion rand GDP. And how much are you going to save? A couple of 100 million. So you would say, yeah, you must look after the pennies to save the pounds. You are right. But in South Africa, unfortunately, that saving process driven from government, is never going to happen. Martin, any other final comments from you as to how maybe all of this ties into what we do at Citadel?
Yeah, I think, George, we had version 1, like you said, a couple of weeks ago. This is version 2. We might have a version 3, who knows? We are living in interesting times. We almost got used to the fact that, one of our pillars, the future will surprise. So we're almost not being surprised anymore in terms of these things happening. We are prepared for it. And I think that is what our clients need to take away tonight, that, our investment philosophy and process, that doesn't change. There's a lot of certainty around that. The way we think about managing money, in terms of our cash flow process, how we look for opportunities. And in fact, all of these things that are happening around the world, we actually need to actually find new opportunities, whether it's Trump, whether it is Canada retaliating, whether it's our own government with our own issues. That's all part of driving financial markets over time. And like you've alluded to earlier on, just this morning, I think, our first Teams chat was still before office hours, where we started retweaking the house view. We had a meeting soon after that, making those changes. We know what we want to do. We're basically waiting for the market to give those opportunities. And when that happens, we just reconfirm and we implement that. So from the advice point of view, it is so important that we stick to those kind of philosophy and process. And then maybe as a last point of hope, I was wondering where the president keeps getting the 3% growth from when he talks to the international community, and then engaging with the Minister of Electricity the other day. He said to us, but they've done proper work with the Bureau of Economic Research in Stellenbosch in terms of the policies that are currently in the pipeline. So pretty much what they proposed in the budget today. And if those policies are really being implemented, but over the next 5 years. So that's why, you know, it's a longer term view than what the budget covered today. But if we continue down this road in the next 5 years, the potential growth for South Africa is somewhere between 3 and 5%. But then everything needs to go right. We need to keep on implementing. We need to fix our relationship with the US. We need to make sure that we also got other trading partners. And that's where everybody needs to come to the table. So I still think that even if this budget didn't show that light in the tunnel, that is still a possibility longer term. But with all of these things falling into place, while we're on that journey towards that higher percent growth, rest assured that we will look for the opportunities that the market present us and make sure that we include that in your portfolios as we did over the last 33 years. So, Georgie, there's nothing else from your side. There's no more questions. Then I think at this point we can say thank you very much for joining us. And we're looking forward to spending more time with you in the next webinar. And hopefully all of this is being approved by government so that we don't need to have version 3 going into April, because that will again help with certainty in the country that we need so desperately. Thank you and have a good evening. Thank you.